Hi, everybody. Bear with me. I need to record a video on Zoom and then share it through YouTube because of certain program restrictions on my work computer that won't allow me to create videos in other ways. So um, you might have to, it means you have to see my face from the beginning. Here we go. All right, my final project, and then therefore my presentation, is entitled Speculating Futures in Mid to Late 19th Century Mexican American Literature. So my thesis statement, this is taken directly from my paper, my review of a sampling of scholarship written about Mexican American fiction published between 1844 and 1899 reveals patterns in language the scholars use to describe these works. These patterns indicate an unconscious move by scholars to categorize these works as Chicanic spec-fic, and in some cases, Chicana futurism. So spec-fic is shorthand for speculative fiction. I'm sure all of you know that. And the piece of art here I chose intentionally. This is an example of Chicanic's futurism that the person Catherine Ramirez, who coined that term, talks about in her scholarship introducing the term. All right, so my theoretical framing. So this idea was spurred from reading the article that we read in class about the dive into the archives, looking at autoethnography and finding it in things like cookbooks and whatnot. And so I was also curious. About if we were to dive into the archives and start to reread some of the text during that time, would we also find earlier examples of Chicanic spec-fic and Chicanic futurism? Then most often scholars sort of pinpoint the beginning of that genre. So what I did was a metacritical study, however, and I looked at scholarship written about mid to late 19th century Mexican American literary productions. The book on the side is an example of a book that I read parts of, not the entire thing. And then scholarship that contributes to the time stamping and definition of Chicanic spec-fic and, of course, Chicanic futurism. So what I did then is I created a very lengthy table in which I placed the words and phrases from the scholarship that I read that used language akin to the language that one would associate with speculative fiction. So, when things like imagined future came up, I would highlight and pull that. Fantasy, the fantastic was used to describe Chacon's poetry, that it invoked the fantastic, which is fantasy is a genre of literature that falls under the umbrella of spec-fic. So what I did was I took the data from that table and I did two things. First, I went through and I highlighted the words and phrases. So I removed things like the prepositions and whatnot from that. And then I took those words and phrases and I put them into a word cloud. And I love word clouds both because they're aesthetically interesting, but they bold and make bigger the words that appear most frequently in a data set, right? So this was really cool because the words that pop up as most prevalent in the scholarship written about literature from the time period I was looking at are words that one would associate with science fiction, spec-fic, conics futurism. So like possibilities and future. Identity, of course, is a topic that's explored in speculative fiction, and multiple identities or possibilities with identity, fantasy, futures, space, multiple potential futures, also historical, including history. And that is also a feature of speculative fiction. Allegory is another one. Playing with time, that came up when folks were talking about the literature from the time period I was looking at. My findings, again, kind of like I just spoke to, was that words like future, futures, fantasy, time, imagined appear with more frequency than other words. They form distinctly specific phrasing that to those phrasing similar to what you would expect in the genre. Sorry, there's a typo there. Additionally, and this is really cool, so one of the features or the criteria of Chicanx futurism is technology. So playing with new technologies in a way that either eschews stereotypes of Mexican American people as being like backwards and old-timey, or manipulating technology as a form of resistance, et cetera. And certainly the printing press was used by Nuevo Mexicanos to write Spanish language newspapers and to have their voice published, right? So the technological advancement of the printing press constitutes the presence of a new form of revolutionary technology that Ramirez and others associate with Chicana futurism. And I was able to find this picture just on the web, but it's the first printing press in New Mexico. So we can speculate that potentially some of the newspapers were hot off this press. That was corny. Okay. In conclusion, the implications for this study, which granted, I need to expand and dig for additional scholarship written about these publications. But that potentially what we're seeing are earlier instances of Chicanic speculative fiction. And if that's true, then there's an opportunity for Chicano Studies literary critics to reconsider what works constitute the genre's natal literature. So, for example, I Am Joaquin is often cited as, an early Chicanic spec fic example, as is Art, Gloria Anzaldúa, La Frontera is as well. And of course, the Ragdoll plagues. And there was definitely a boom of Chicanic speculative fiction in the 90s, for sure. That's undeniable. But I put a book about Chacon before the Ragdoll plagues, again, representing that there's potential for us to read speculative fiction in Chicanic's literary productions much earlier than sort of the mid-20th century. And then, of course, there's a book from V. Castro, which is what we would consider today's Chicanic speculative fiction. So it's horror, for sure, which falls under the genre. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this was insightful.